I was talking with one of my students the other day, and they asked a great question. What should they be focusing on right now? Should they be focused on refining their strengths or developing their weaknesses? That answer is not as straightforward as you might think. How do you know which one you should be focusing on right now in your journey? So, in today's video, I want to share a few kind of recommendations or ideas or seeds I like to plant to help students in this decision making process. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also, give this video a like. It helps me in the YouTube algorithm and gets seen to more jujitsu students that need help. If you haven't hit that bell icon, go ahead and do that right now. That way you are notified whenever the latest video comes out. Now let's talk about identifying your weaknesses and who should be refining their strengths. Usually who I recommend to start refining their strengths is either upper belts or if you are getting ready for a competition. If you're an upper belt, I recommend that you start to kind of figure out some of your strengths. I think it's good to start to figure out what you like to do, what you feel naturally inclined to do. Usually around mid purple belt is kind of when I recommend students do this. If you're just kind of a hobbyist, if you are a blue belt or less and you're not competing, I usually recommend that you bias your training toward developing your weaknesses. Whenever I was coming up, I used to get a lot more instant gratification from training my strengths. And why wouldn't I? I was able to hit the sweeps that I wanted. I was able to control the positions I most like, and I was able to attack the submissions that I felt the most comfortable with. I got that instant gratification. I was able to kind of force my will on a lot of people. But when I actually took the time to develop my weaknesses and work on them, I would always see my game just shoot up to the next level. It just took a little bit more time and was a lot more uncomfortable than refining my strengths. When I look back on it now, I think that I just didn't want to feel this new sense of uncomfortability by training my weaknesses more often than my strengths. At times when I got put in those positions, it almost felt like I was brand new in jujitsu. I'd been training for a couple of years now. So why do I still feel like I'm inferior in these positions? I just kind of had all these negative thoughts that it was just easier for me just to focus on my strengths and not have to worry about that problem. The issue with that is it created this kind of vicious loop of just mediocrity because, yeah, my strengths got better, but that didn't do anything to improve my weaknesses magically. I wasn't magically now more comfortable training my weaknesses or I knew what to do. I had to finally realize, man, I just need to experience that uncomfortability and just know that that's part of the process and just be okay experiencing kind of that growth zone. And that's all part of jujitsu. Let me know down in the comments below, where do you think you're at right now in your journey? Should you be focusing on refining your strengths or developing your weaknesses? Now let's talk about identifying your weaknesses and how to spot that. You are commonly in positions and you feel like the execution of your techniques aren't working, or you maybe feel lost in certain positions, or you just know you have no knowledge of what to do. That's a very obvious indication that that's a weakness. If you just are having no clue what's going on and you get caught in this position, or you get caught with this takedown or in this submission that you've never seen before, well, that's pretty good idea that maybe you're not as competent as you thought you were, or you lack the appropriate competence. You have to first be exposed to a position or exposed to a move. You have to have kind of competency of it of some kind. And then you have to develop that capability, basically who you can do it on or against. Your weaknesses aren't always going to be defensive. Your weaknesses could be offensive based as well. I remember that I played a lot of bottom game until I was about a brown belt. But then once I could get on top of people, my submission game was absolutely terrible. That was because I played way too much on the bottom. A weakness of mine was actually maintaining top position and attacking top position. Just because you have knowledge of it doesn't mean you actually have the capability of being able to execute. A lot of times this is a big issue for students. They know the steps, but then they can't actually do the procedural knowledge of the technique. They can't actually execute the technique in live training. You maybe know the steps, you're not forgetting it, you don't have to think about it, but the body shifts a little bit to the right or shifts a little bit to the left or pressures you this way or pressures you back. You're still getting the hang of that aspect. And that's just because you've not learned how to deal with the kind of changing environment aspect as much yet. That just takes a little bit of time to be able to develop, and that's no problem, but that's still a weakness. Some of you guys in jiu-jitsu have a very Eeyore attitude about your just overall game. You'll say, well, Chase, I'm so bad at everything, I wouldn't know which weakness to focus on first. I'm just so bad and da 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 da, very kind of self-deprecating in a way, which, I understand. I'm kind of that way too. So I get it. What you're really wanting to do is try to figure out which of your weaknesses that you should be focusing on first. Now, here's a little fun exercise that I always like to give my students if they're really wanting to kind of brain dump, get out a sheet of paper and just go ahead and list out as broadly as you can the different skills or the different positions that you know, and write out as much as you can. Only set a timer for about 10 minutes. This should not take you an hour, and just think about it and exhaust everything that you know. It's not every technique, but mount, back mount, rear mount, side mount, escapes, pin, guard retention. Just start writing out all the stuff that you know, and then take that sheet of paper, take it to a coach or take it to an upper belt and say, hey, do you see anything that was a gap on here that I didn't write? Like, is there anything that you think is missing? Maybe you didn't put on there the guard position, and your partner looks at it and says, man, you didn't put the guard position on here. That's probably a pretty good indication that your recall skills aren't as strong as you might think. And what I mean by recall is being able to pull up that information from your past learning. And maybe you haven't even learned it yet. Maybe you're still very new in jiu-jitsu and you're like, I didn't learn about what the guard was until you just said it. Now I'm going to go look it up. Knowledge is power. And the beautiful thing about YouTube is if you have a gap in knowledge, then why are you not studying it? Why are you not going onto YouTube and typing in shrimp escapes or how to escape side mount or how to do X, Y, and Z or how to do this strategy or that strategy? There are so many answers out there. There is so much abundant of information that you being exposed to the baseline information shouldn't be the problem. Whenever I started really diving into training more of my weaknesses, it wasn't as bad as I actually thought it was going to be. And it makes sense because I had already been training for a couple of years and developed. I knew how to improve. I knew somewhat of the steps. I knew I could roll in a specific way or watch videos to gain more knowledge, that the learning process or my learning curve was not as steep as it was before. When I first learned how to elbow escape, it took me forever to do a realistic elbow escape. But then when I spent time studying guard retention, it didn't take me nearly as long to start to implement some success in live training as it did an elbow escape, because I already had those precursor skills and I had that precursor knowledge to build upon. Don't be afraid to experience that growth zone. I think that's a thing that we're not really wanting to admit as jiu-jitsu students. I don't care about being uncomfortable. I'm comfortable in the uncomfortable. No, you're not, because if you were, you would just be in the bottom of the position all the time. And if you say, well, that's not very fun. Yeah, because it's uncomfortable and it's not very fun when you're quote unquote losing. That's all part of the jiu-jitsu game. Yeah, if you can take that list and understand where your basic gaps are and start filling those in with some high quality information, then you're going to be heading in the right direction to start improving those weaknesses. Now let's talk a little bit about what a strength is. The easiest way to measure it, just for the general population, is going to be someone who is of equal skill to yourself. And this is where competitions can play a very beneficial role. If you think you're really good with a core set of moves, if you think you have awesome takedowns and you think you have awesome sweeps or a great back take, enter into a tournament of someone who's your own skill and your own size and try to just force that down their throat while they're trying to stop you. And if you can do it, I would agree that's probably a pretty good sign that it's a strength. And if nothing that you have works, well, it doesn't mean that it's not your strengths. It just means it's not a strength or a high enough caliber of strength compared to all your other competitors. Depending on how old you are and the competition that you're facing, that can vary greatly. But this could be even applied in a training situation. If you're in the gym and you're more of a hobbyist and you're training in a room and you're really never going to do a competition, start to find people who give you a kind of 50-50 challenge. Kind of ignore their belt. Sometimes you catch them, sometimes they catch you, sometimes it's a 60-40 exchange. You should be trying to find those people, and that's a very good way to measure if something is a strength. And if you can do it on those individuals on a consistent basis, like 80% of the time, it's probably also a good way to identify a strength. Obviously, if you can do it on people who are even more skilled than you, that's even more confirmation that it's probably a strength. If you are a blue belt that's running around and you train with some brown belts and black belts and you're like, man, they crush me in every other position, but if they get me in this one thing or if I catch this one thing, I can really make it work and I can put them in some serious danger, but that's your like only trick that you got. That's even more evidence that's probably a strength. If you're wanting some high quality information or you're looking for someone to help you in this process, then you might be a good candidate for my coaching program. So you can apply down below. I work with jiu-jitsu students who are really lacking direction and needing a quality training plan. We actually develop you a full 12-month outline of your jiu-jitsu, and then we really break it down to each month. That way you can set aside the actual plans and actions that you need to take either in studying or practicing or whatever you need to do to take more ownership of your jiu-jitsu journey. If that sounds interesting to you, make sure you apply down at the link below and we can see if you are a good fit. That is going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys for sticking around, and make sure you check out this next video that's going to pop up right here. And until next time, I'll see y'all later.